Hi guys, I'm Gasha. Welcome to the channel and welcome as always to our coffee times. This year I thought, towards the end of the year we all make our videos about the best and the worst books, but I also wanted to do this other video that a lot of people have been putting up, which is my surprises and disappointments of 2020, because sometimes it's not only about the best things you've read and the worst things you've read, but also the things that positively surprise you and the things that disappoint you and turn your heart apart. So we're going to be talking about those books today.
It's coffee time.
So I have put 6 books into the category books that unexpectedly surprised me, and 6 books on the category disappointment. So yeah, before we go to those, if you love books, if you love horror, please consider subscribing before you leave and hit the notification bell. And now let's go to all of those books. Let's talk first about the books that surprised me and why. So the first book that I would like to mention here is one that I have actually read recently in the month of November, and that is Hold Back the Tide by Melinda Salisbury. The reason why is that I guess I was just expecting your typical YA horror story with your typical tropes, and this book was just nothing like it. And I think I'm a little bit, conditioned to always think that YA horror is going to be this ABC, which in a lot of cases is, but there's also a lot of good YA horror books out there, and this is definitely one of them, and it just caught me a little bit off guard. I didn't expect it to be so dark, I didn't expect it to be so violent at times, and I really appreciated that this was a story about a young girl that was really strong and was fighting for the things she believed in, and she didn't need to leave everything for a love interest or anything like that. So I really love to see that in this book. We are following Alba. She lives with her father. They are in charge of taking care of a loch, and they are close to a village where people kind of, has an old grudge against them. So they're kind of really distanced from the village. And then one day the water in this loch starts to go down and down, and this is going to suppose a big problem, a big threat for the village and their way of living. And so apart from that, there's something else, something dark that it's roaming the lands. I don't want to say anything about that really, because I just want you to go into it without knowing too much about that dark thing that's coming for them. But trust me when I say this was a really great read, and I absolutely loved how darker and darker the story was getting, and I was not expecting that ending. And from one YA horror book that I really enjoyed to the next one, because we have So Kill Girls by Clara LeGrand. I really loved this book, so much more than I thought. I think I even gave it 5 coffee mugs. And this book is about Marion, and after she loses her father, her mom, her sister, they move to this island. And when they get there, they start to hear all of these rumors of girls that have been disappearing in that island for years. And the story is told from the perspective of 3 of the So Kill girls that live in this island. I absolutely love this perspective, from all the different girls, to see where they were coming from. And I love this book because it was a mix of fantasy, it was a mix of like horror and so many things, but it also had a lot to do with women empowerment and getting them together. There's a lot of cool stuff that it's also appearing in the book, like cults, which is something that I love to see in books. And I don't know, I really enjoyed it. It is kind of like a bigger book. I think it's around 450 pages more or less, but I just flew through it. And I'm definitely interested in checking out other books by the author, because I really did enjoy it. So these 2 that I have mentioned, if you're looking for a nice YA horror, if you're looking for more horror, then definitely go for Hold Back the Tide. But if you're looking for something with a little bit more fantasy added to it, I would definitely recommend you to pick up So Kill Girls. The next one is The Forgotten Island by David Sodergren, and the reason why I put it in the surprise list is because I knew nothing about this book. I just bought it because I wanted to read a couple of books this year that were horror books based on islands. That was it. And so that was my only reason actually for picking this book up, and I'm like, I'm gonna buy all of these books authors, okay? So this is gonna be now out to buy author for me. He has a new book out that I really want to check. I think it's called Maggie's Grave, so I really want to get to that one in 2021. And I love this book because it has everything a horror lover likes. It had slasher, it had creature, it had everything, and I absolutely loved it. However, there's a lot of trigger warnings for this book as well, so just be aware of that before you go into the book, and some of the trigger warnings are abuse and rape. But this book was just so interesting, and the story kept twisting and turning until the very end. It doesn't leave you even take a little breath. We are following two sisters that go to this island in Thailand, and they are going there to reconnect. And while they're in this island, they go to a party and they take a boat, and they end up in a mysterious island where years ago, well, while they were digging in the ground, something escaped from the deep of the middle of the earth, and that something that escaped is still in that island. So we find our girls together with other people that were in this party, stranded in this island, facing that darkness that came out of the earth. And you're not ready for this. Like, this was such a roller coaster of emotions, and I just love it so much. So that's why I decided to put it here, because it really surprised me. I was not expecting to love this book so much. I was just like, oh yeah, another book about, you know, horror in an island and stuff, but it's definitely one of the best that I have read. Next, let's talk about Skynet by Adrienne Young. So I picked up this book when it was hyped and everybody was reading it, and I finally read it this year. So this book was so good, and this is her debut book, and it is a fantasy about Vikings, and we follow two different clans that have always been rivals, but it is just more than that. It really explores and does justice to the Viking culture. We also see healers. There's this elements of magic to it that are fantastic. I love how human it feels, how the characters feel so real. And even though in this book we do have a love story, because, you know, it's typical for YA fantasy, it didn't bother me at all. It made complete sense. I was totally down for it. I was rooting for them, and it is definitely a great fantasy. I don't always love fantasy this much, especially when it comes to YA fantasy. I don't know why, I always end up giving them like lower ratings, but this one was nearly perfect book for me. I also love that it was a standalone and it didn't need anything else added to the story. So it is an action-packed, amazing Viking story. And the last one from the ones that surprised me is February 29th, and this is a very interesting one because I just picked it up because it was like really cheap on Amazon for my Kindle, and I had zero expectations on this book, and I think I ended up giving it 4 coffee mugs, and I have never heard anybody talking about this book before, so that's why my expectations were kind of low. So this book is just so good. It's such a different, interesting take on a fantasy, and it is about a kid that is telling actually his story. The point of view here is told from a kid's perspective, which I think for some people was the main problem because they didn't like the writing since the story was being told from a kid's perspective, but that did not bother me at all. And so this kid is telling you his story of him and his twin brother and what happened to them on that February month. So that's all I want to tell you really, because this is such an interesting book that also takes different twists, and I don't want to spoil anything for anybody, but if you're looking for a weird and different take on kind of like a fantasy story told from a kid's perspective, I would encourage you to give this one a try. Moving on with The Overbridge by Deep Aria, and I put it on the surprise category because the author reached out to me and offered to send me his novella so that I could review it and give an honest review. So I had no expectations at all on this novella, and when I read it I just fell in love with it because it just felt like a nice short horror story, you know, and it was just so rich when it comes to the characters and everything, despite being so short, and I absolutely love the story. It is about a group of strangers that while they are driving in their cars and they are crossing a bridge, suddenly they all fell asleep, and when they wake up again they don't know what happened, but everything is covered on like with fog. There is like fog everywhere and they cannot see. Also, there's a lot of cars that are empty. Where did these people go? What happened to them? And the people that did awake again in this bridge inside of their cars, they're kind of trying to figure out what happened to them, and it just sounds like out of the Twilight Zone, and I absolutely loved it. So for me it was a really pleasant surprise. Now let's go to the juicy part, the part where I talk to you about the books that disappointed me. And these are different from, you know, the books that I have put on worst 2020 reads. These are just the ones that for one reason or another I kind of thought I was gonna love them and then I didn't. So let's start with the obvious one that I also recently talked to you guys about, and that is the Southern Book Club's Guide to Slaying Vampires by Grady Hendrix. Listen, the word vampire is in the book. It's Grady Hendrix, it's adult. I was like, I'm gonna love this. And for the most part I did, but not really. It is such a weird feeling that I have with this book. It's like I love the writing style and the beginning was so engaging and I was loving it, and then things started to happen and it started to go downhill for me. Honestly, this is a book that if it didn't have the word vampire on the title, maybe it would have been beneficial because people would have started questioning it if the neighbor is really a vampire. If not, I think this title is a little bit misleading. I don't know if on purpose or not. But I had my weird feelings towards the ending. There were some decisions that were made that I didn't like. There's a lot of things that are not being explained about this neighbor that I would have loved to see in the book. There is rape in the book that I didn't see any reason why that should be in the book, really. And the characters were really superficial a lot of the times. So maybe, you know, it just didn't vibe for me as much as I hoped it would. I don't hate the book, that's the problem. It's like a love-hate relationship. Like, I don't fully hate it, but I also don't fully love it. So I think it's fair to say I was just disappointed. Next we have a book that came out earlier this year and I actually bought a new hard copy of it. I was so sure I was gonna love it, and that is Pine by Francine Toon. But I ended up getting rid of my copy because I just did not vibe with this book at all, and I'm so sorry, but like at 30% into the book I was like, I can't. this is not it. And it was such a pity because the book started so well. It started super atmospheric. We're following a girl with her father and they're driving around in Halloween night and they see this woman running out of the woods and they decide to pick her up and take her home and, you know, see if she needs help, what happened to her. And I was like, this sounds perfect. And there was also tarot involved in it, tarot cards and like candles, and I was like, oh, it's gonna be great. But no, the characters were so bland, the story was so dragging, and it was like I was forcing myself to keep on reading. It was so not thrilling or engaging. I was so bored and I felt really bad because I really wanted to love this book. So yeah, this was really a disappointment. The next one is another book that I also owned and I got rid of already, and that is Side Effects My Very by Julie Murphy. I picked it up because I really love Dumpling and I was looking for other books by the author, and this was a hard-hitting contemporary, so I thought, you know, I was gonna love it even more because I do tend to like hard-hitting contemporary stories. But no, this was a book that was really frustrating for me. It is like the main idea of the book is cancer patients and how their illness changes the relationships that they have with their family, with their loved ones, how they become another person when the illness takes over, all of these things. And you know, when I was reading the book, at some point I really started to get really annoyed with the characters, and I'm not sure if it's because the author was trying to portray, you know, how difficult it is sometimes to deal with patients that are fighting such an illness, and how sometimes they become defensive and, you know, unbearable at times. But I just couldn't, like, I was really not vibing with the characters. I didn't understand their decisions. I didn't understand, you know, why they were doing these things or saying these things, and I just in general didn't vibe with the characters, and I think that was my biggest problem. This book is told from two different perspectives, a boy and a girl. So the boy is this girl's best friend, and the girl is the one that has cancer. And I really wanted to love it, but it just was not for me. The next one is one that I read back in April, and I wanted to love it so bad. So bad. And I don't hate it, but it was definitely disappointing to me. And that is The Deep by Alma Katsu. I was hoping to love this book so much because this is a horror story that takes place in the Titanic. We are in two different years. We're in 1912 when the Titanic went down, and then we're also in 1916 when we were in the Britannica. And I was like, I'm gonna love this. I'm gonna love it. And fair to the book, it was really atmospheric, it was kind of creepy at times, and I absolutely loved the characters' stories and to follow our main character in these two different ships. The book keeps changing between 1912 and 1916, and my biggest problem with this book is I didn't see the horror part in it at all. There was no moment where I was scared or something got really creepy. I think it was missing more intense horror moments or unsettling moments that were not there. For the amount of pages that you get in this book, I think it was missing that thrill, and that was what really disappointed me, to really see something creepy, you know. Yeah, so I think it was just my expectation of a more in the horror side book, and it was just atmospheric tale of the Titanic, if you will. So like I said, I didn't hate it, but it was kind of disappointing. The next one is another one that I have unhauled, and that is The Bone Witch by Rin Chupeco. This is one of those books when you see the cover and you're like, oh my god, I'm gonna love it. And you read the synopsis and you're like, oh my god, I'm gonna love it. And then you pick it up and you're like, I can't. And it's super frustrating. So the story is about this girl who discovers one day after her brother dies that she can actually use necromancy and bring dead people back from the dead. And this is a power that is not really well seen where she lives, so she becomes kind of like an outcast and she's thrown out. And honestly, my biggest issue with this book was that in the whole book nearly nothing happened. Nearly nothing happened, and I was bored. And the magic that they were describing and how she was being trained to use her powers, I mean, it was interesting. It was just so boring. It was just not for me. It might be for other people. I know some people out there really love this book, so it might be just that it was just not vibing with me, or the writing style was not vibing with me. But yeah, this was a really big disappointment for me. And the last one that I would like to mention that was a disappointment for me is Nightflyers by George R.R. Martin. I absolutely love the Song of Ice and Fire books, at least the ones that are out there. Let's see if we get new books. So I thought, you know, let's try science fiction George R.R. Martin, because I also really loved his vampire book. But this wasn't it for me. I think my biggest issue was that there was so many characters and we had so little time to really develop the full story. I was really bored reading this, and I got the illustrated edition, which is beautiful. It's pretty, the illustrations are amazing, and this is about a crew that are in the ship called the Nightflyer when they realize that there is something else inside of the ship with them. And I love science fiction combined with horror, but like I said, I think this story was in the need of more pages because the characters are so rushly introduced, and there are so many characters because it's the whole crew that is on this ship. I don't know if there were 5 or 6 of them, and this was so short that I couldn't even care for the characters if they died or lived or anything, because I didn't have time to even get to know them. And I think this was one of my biggest issues. I'm not somebody that I can only enjoy books that are really character driven per se. I also like books that are plot driven. It's just, it has to click with me, you know, and this one sadly just didn't. Alright, you guys, so these were 6 books that surprised me and 6 books that disappointed me in 2020. I hope that you enjoyed this video. Let me know down below, what are your surprises and disappointments this year? Let's talk about it in the comments. Thanks so much for watching, you guys. Please give the video a big thumbs up for support. If you want to follow me, know the social media, as always, the links are down below, and I hope to see you all in the next coffee time. Bye.